This is concerning. It's also concerning that one of the other pay-for provisions, the one focused on cryptocurrency, focuses on an industry that's rapidly developing within the United States, that depends on a lot of innovation happening in the United States. One of these pay-for provisions seeks to bring in more revenue to the federal government, or at least to promise more revenue to the federal government, with the promise of requiring those who spy and sell cryptocurrency to treat it the same way as they would the exchange of securities. Mr. President, this is very different than securities. These aren't just stocks. It's something very different. It's a medium of exchange that, if adopted more widely, could facilitate a lot of economic activity and a lot of innovation within the United States of America. If, in fact, we pass this bill, mark my words, it's going to have a chilling effect on innovation within this sector. And what you'll see is the flight of innovation and investment related to innovation to offshore locations around the globe. Places outside the United States may well be the ones to reap the benefit associated with the loss here in the United States if we adopt an unproven, untested, unknown strategy for dealing with something, trying to adopt many decades-old regulatory policies to a completely new form of exchange, one that, by the way, values very highly the privacy of those who exchange in it. And so if what you're going to do is take away that value by requiring that all of it be registered and publicly disclosed, and by giving the federal government the ability to peer into it, you're going to stifle innovation. You're going to make a lot of people upset, and you're going to make Americans poorer.
No, I'm definitely big news that we heard from Senators Toomey and Lummis. They also announced that Senators Portman and Sinema, who had the opposing amendment, who are on the infrastructure bill, the leads, have come to an agreement on language moving forward. The other important thing that they noted is that the Treasury Department has also signed off on that language. We've seen that Senator Ron Wyden will not be joining them on this amendment, but does not oppose it moving forward. So the key question now is, will the Senate adopt the deal? The deal was step one, the process is part two. So because last night the Senate voted to limit debate and kicked off the 30-hour clock before the final vote on infrastructure, no more amendments are in order. So in order for this deal to be incorporated into the underlying package, it has to be done by unanimous consent, which means that no senator can dispute it. So I think it's going to be an interesting afternoon. I know the crypto community is waiting with bated breath to see if anyone does object when the UC request is going to be made to move this later this afternoon.
How big do you think this can get, this crypto means gaming? Are we at the start? Are we in the middle? Where are we in this?
We are in the very, very end. Like we're in batting practice. Like the game hasn't even started.
Okay, yeah. So we need to be paying attention to crypto and gaming here. Big time.
Big time. Well, look, gaming on its own is a $150 billion a year business. It's bigger than movies and music combined, I think, by 2. So you marry that with this idea that crypto gives you property rights, and I think you can envision, virtual economies that are the size of some real economy.
Goes to the sense of fairness. Democracy relies on the country feeling like the system is fair, that it's not rigged, and that certain people are not getting benefits that others are not. And so when people look at specific individuals who are effectively paying no tax and, of course, have enormous amounts of money, they raise questions and they say, does this make sense? In the private equity world, you're now on the board of Apollo. The issue of carried interest, for example, I think there's a lot of people. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, who, arguably should be saying things in favor of its clients, says this is crazy. Carried interest makes no sense. And so there's and we just saw this New York Times piece over the weekend, private equity taking not just carried interest, but trying to move management fees into carried interest. I mean, there are things that are just wrong with the system. And the question is why people in the industry won't come out and publicly say, okay, this doesn't make sense. At least we'll try to fix the stuff that is clear to everybody, I think, that it's not on the right side of history.
Well, you make an extremely good point here, Andrew, which is if the American public doesn't feel that the tax system is fair, we then start to have more compliance problems. People don't trust it. One of the things, and I will come back to your point, one of the things that I really did not like about this ProPublica story is one of the fairness elements of the American tax system is we don't disclose people's taxes. Yeah. That is a story in itself, because if we start disclosing people's taxes broadly for political reasons, for other reasons, that undermines fairness, undermines confidence. Now, going back to your point on capital gains and favorable treatment of capital gains, I believe strongly that we should have favorable treatment of capital gains. It encourages investment, encourages dynamism, encourages employment. Where we draw those lines is something we should be continuing to examine. You raised carried interest, we examine that. You raised borrowing against your gains and realizing capital today. We should be forever looking at those things, and the American public should understand we're looking at those things.
Tech is now so big that it's a risk to the global financial system. That's a warning from the Bank of International Settlements. It says the vast amount of data held by the likes of Google, Facebook, Alibaba, and others means these companies could easily and rapidly reshape finance, and that could have a destabilizing effect on existing banking systems. The BIS says it wants to see regulators rein in big tech fast. And joining us now is the General Manager of the Bank of International Settlements, Augustin Carstens. Sir, fantastic to have you on the show. This was a fascinating new report. I read the entire thing yesterday. Can you start by explaining this specific fear, how we go from these big tech giants with access to huge volumes of data to potentially seeing entire banking systems destabilized? What's the key?
Well, thank you very much for having me in your program, Julia. I think the key issue is what we call it the DNA of big techs here in the BIS. DNA is data, networks, and additional activity. The thing is that by the use of data in a network environment, that can multiply the number of transactions that is being done through a particular payment service, and that will produce more information and it will produce more advantage. The real issue is that today commercial banks do not have equitable access to all the information that big techs have. And well, of course, big information is a key input into financial services. And therefore, if you have a larger or broader command of information, you will have a comparative advantage. So this has a lot to do also with who has the control of the information of people. So what we are trying to steer is a debate on how information should be used, who should have command of it, and in that way, I would say, enhance competitiveness in the future in the financial services industry.
I mean, you use a specific example, and that's China, where we know two big tech companies, Alibaba with Alipay and, of course, WeChat with WeChat Pay, account for 94% of the payments market, and they scaled up incredibly quickly. Now, it's a completely different market to some extent than others like the EU and the United States. But do you see that specific number there as a reason perhaps why the central bank's looking at digital payments, looking at a digital coin, a central bank digital coin of its own, because that amount of power in the hands of private companies is frightening for any nation, China or anywhere else?
Well, I would say that there are two big instruments that central banks and financial authorities have, but in particular central banks. That's a regulation, and the other thing is to provide central bank digital currencies. I think that it's very hard to imagine a world today with all these cyber currencies, cyber assets, and I would say the appetite of the public to have digital solutions for transactions and not have central bank digital currencies. At the end of the day, I think that reality will impose itself. And what we are seeing today is a lot of drive by central banks to move forward with CBDC. Each country will take their own decisions, but it's a very important area. And the other is regulation. Yes, what you just said at the outset in this question is the tremendously fast progress that big techs with financial services as financial services provider can give, and I would say the unequal treatment from the point of view of regulation is what puts commercial banks in a disadvantage. So what we are really trying to put on the table is the need to have equal treatment between different providers of financial services.
So if we take an example of the United States, I mean, you've got Google, you've got Facebook, you've got Amazon, for example. Only really Apple Pay, as an example for Apple, is one that's really pushed into the payment space in some sort of fundamental way. Are you saying that regulators need to look at the activity level, look at the scale of data, and sort of formulate regulation for entry for these tech companies, for example, before they try and go into the payment space in a more fundamental way? Because once they do it, they can scale up so quickly, it then becomes really hard to tackle.
Well, the issue of regulation is very complex. Entry certainly is one. In a way, for example, today, to have a bank, you need to have capital, you have to obey different rules on liquidity, leverage, and so on. That is something that at some point, given the different types of services that big tech, financial services that big tech might offer, it might be adequate to move in that direction. The other important aspect, as I say, is the use of data. Today, banks have some very specific regulation on how they can use data, right, and that is not necessarily the case with big tech. And finally, there is another important issue, and that is that many of these big techs provide some services that have become key in the financial sector industry. For example, cloud services. So you have competitors also being important services providers for financial systems. So therefore, I think that there is a lot of things that we need to think and to basically have a system with three characteristics: that is competitive, that is safe, and that is respects privacy of people.
Yeah, and the classic example of this is Amazon, with their access into e-commerce. The next step to payments and facilitating those e-commerce purchases would be very easy for them. The question is, to your point, is there a level playing field with what the banks can provide? And right now there isn't. There's a trust issue here as well. A lot of people don't trust big tech, but they don't trust governments, quite frankly, either. And that's part of why we've seen, I think, the interest in cryptocurrencies. And I saw back in January, you said, look, there's real risks here, and that Bitcoin, for example, could go to zero. How do you feel about this today? And how do we separate all of these issues and make sure we get all of them right? The regulation in each sector, because there are those that say the most efficient way of using and facilitating payments in the future in the financial system is crypto. Where does the BIS stand on this?
Well, where we stand here is that we need to certainly take advantage of all the technology that is out there. For example, the technology on which Bitcoin is based, DLT and blockchain, is a wonderful technology, and I think we need to adopt it. Now, the real issue is the application. I think that Bitcoin, in the way it was formed, is not really delivering what it's supposed to deliver, which is a good substitute for cash. It's not a good deposit of value. It's not a good medium of exchange. It's hugely volatile. It's an ecological disaster. So what we want to do is to use the technology and offer people a better representation of really trusted money. What is the really trusted money that is out there? Well, it's basically cash. And today, cash is just represented in papers and coins, and people are asking for digital solutions, and therefore we have to raise to the challenge and provide them with cash in the digital form. That also would facilitate many financial transactions. It would facilitate for example, to reduce transaction costs in cross-border payments. It would facilitate also financial inclusion. We have many, still even in countries like the US, a high percentage of the population still doesn't have access to financial services.
Right.
And therefore, it would be interesting to look for something like this to make a dent in that regard.
Every time I think about the payment space and the future of payments, my head explodes because there's so many things to consider. And this was a whole new one, this report, and I loved reading it. So come back and talk to us soon, please. Great to have you with us. Agustin Carstens, the General Manager of the Bank of International Settlements. Great to talk to you, sir.